For centuries, this was the foundation of civilization. Gold, real, physical, incorruptible. Every empire, every kingdom, every great power in history understood one fundamental rule. Money must be backed by gold. Paper is a promise. Gold is a guarantee. Rome debased its coins and watched inflation tear apart its provinces. Weimar Germany printed paper and destroyed a generation's savings. Break that rule, and your currency collapses. Your economy implodes. Your people lose faith. History is littered with the wreckage of nations that tried to print money without gold to back it. And then, in February 1797, Britain broke the rule. The Bank of England announced that it would no longer exchange paper banknotes for gold. Not temporarily, not partially, completely. Every economist, every banker, every rival nation expected the same thing: collapse. Britain didn't collapse. It fought the most expensive war in its history. It defeated Napoleon, and it emerged as the most powerful nation on earth. Without gold. This is the story of how Britain replaced metal with trust, and accidentally invented the modern financial system. To understand what Britain did, you need to understand the moment of pure terror that forced their hand. In February 1797, Britain was at war with revolutionary France. The war was going badly. The French had conquered the Netherlands. They had defeated Austria. The Royal Navy had suffered mutinies. And then, on February 22nd, something unthinkable happened. French soldiers landed on British soil. 1,200 French troops invaded at Fishguard on the coast of Wales. It was a small force, badly organized, quickly defeated. But the psychological effect was devastating. If the French could land in Britain, what else could happen? The news hit London like a shockwave. People rushed to their banks. They wanted their gold. Not tomorrow. Now. Runs had already been happening in Newcastle, Sunderland, and Durham. Regional banks were failing, and every failing bank sent more panicked depositors to the Bank of England. And the Bank of England had a problem. The Bank of England was not some new institution. It had been founded in 1694, over 100 years earlier, specifically to fund wars and stabilize the crown's finances. It had survived crises before. It had outlasted kings. For a century, its notes had been as good as the gold they represented, which is exactly why what came next was so dangerous. When people began doubting the Bank of England, they weren't doubting a building or a balance sheet. They were doubting the single most trusted financial institution in the world. Paper in circulation, nearly 11 million pounds. Gold in the vault, barely 5 million. There was almost twice as much paper as there was gold to back it. If the public continued demanding gold, the Bank of England would be bankrupt within days. And if the Bank of England collapsed, so would the British economy, so would the war effort, so would Britain. Prime Minister William Pitt faced an impossible choice. Option 1, let the bank continue paying out gold, watch the reserves drain to zero, and watch the financial system of the British Empire collapse in the middle of a war. Option 2, do something that no major European power had ever successfully done before. Tell the public, your paper money is no longer redeemable for gold. He chose option 2. On February 26, 1797, the Privy Council issued an order. The Bank of England was instructed to suspend all cash payments in gold. Paper banknotes would continue to circulate, but they could no longer be exchanged for the metal they supposedly represented. Parliament formalized it as the Bank Restriction Act. The reaction was exactly what you'd expect. The satirist Richard Brinsley Sheridan called the Bank of England an elderly lady in the city who had unfortunately fallen into bad company. The cartoonist James Gilray drew Pitt the Younger seducing the old lady, stripping her of her gold. This is where the Bank of England's famous nickname comes from, the Old Lady of Threadneedle Street. It was born as an insult. Ironically, France was already several years into its own paper money experiment, and it was failing badly. Across Europe, rival nations waited for the inevitable. France predicted Britain's economy would implode within months. Why would anyone accept a piece of paper that couldn't be exchanged for gold? But something strange happened. Nothing collapsed. The morning after suspension, shops opened, merchants traded, wages were paid, taxes were collected. The economy did not stop. And the question that baffled economists for generations is, why? Why did British paper money retain its value when the gold backing was removed? The answer is one of the most important ideas in the history of money. First, taxation. The British government required that all taxes be paid in these banknotes. This meant that no matter what you thought about paper money, you needed it. Every landlord, every merchant, every citizen had to acquire banknotes to pay the crown. This created permanent structural demand for paper currency. Second, trade. Britain's navy controlled the world's oceans. Trade continued to flow from India, from the Caribbean, from North America. Goods moved, revenue was generated. The economy had real productive activity behind it. The paper wasn't floating in a vacuum. It was anchored to a functioning commercial system. Third, debt service. Britain continued to pay its bondholders on time, every time. The government did not default. It did not delay. The financial system's most important promise, "We will pay you back," remained intact. And fourth, perhaps the most important of all, institutional credibility. Think about what that actually meant in 1797. Parliament controlled the purse, not the king. Every spending decision, every borrowing decision had to pass through elected representatives. If the government wanted to raise money, it had to make its case publicly in debate on the record. Compare that to France, where the monarch could, and did, simply decree new money into existence, or to Spain, whose kings had repeatedly seized assets from their own merchants when the treasury ran dry. Those systems destroyed the incentive to lend, to invest, to trust. Britain's system was different. A merchant who bought a government bond knew that Parliament, not a king's mood, stood behind that promise. There was no single point of failure. No one man who could wake up one morning and decide the rules had changed. The system had checks. It had transparency. It had accountability. And crucially, it had a track record. Over a century of honoring its debts, even in wartime, even under pressure. People trusted the paper because they trusted the system behind the paper. And they trusted the system because the system had never given them a reason not to. This is the idea that changed everything. Money doesn't need to be made of value. It needs to be backed by trust. And trust comes from institutions, not metal. Compare this to France. Revolutionary France had tried paper money. The assignats, they printed wildly. They had no stable tax system, no independent central bank, no parliamentary oversight. The assignats became worthless within years. Hyperinflation destroyed the economy. The metal was never the point. The system was. What was supposed to be a temporary emergency measure lasted 24 years. 24 years. Britain fought the most expensive wars in its history against the most powerful military force in Europe, using money that was backed by nothing but trust. And not only did the system survive, it expanded. By 1800, the bank could issue more notes without worrying about gold reserves. The money supply became flexible. When the economy needed more money, for war, for trade, for growth, the bank could provide it. Gold would have been a ceiling, paper was a door. By 1814, when the Napoleonic Wars ended, banknotes in circulation had ballooned to 28 million pounds, backed by just 2.2 million in gold. 13 pounds in circulation for every 1 pound of gold in the vault. By any classical economic theory, this should have been catastrophic. Hyperinflation, currency collapse, economic ruin. Instead, Britain won the war, built the largest navy in history, expanded its empire, and emerged from 1815 as the undisputed global superpower. And here's the remarkable ending. In 1821, Britain voluntarily resumed gold convertibility. But not because the paper system had failed, because the wars were over and returning to gold was politically useful. Landowners and creditors wanted stable prices. Robert Peel led the Bullion Committee, restructured the financial system, and by May 1821, the Bank of England was once again paying gold for notes. The experiment ended by choice, not by collapse. But the lesson had already been learned. For 24 years, Britain had proven something that the rest of the world wouldn't fully accept for another 150 years. To understand how radical this was, you need to understand what the world believed in 1797. In 1797, money was gold. That was not an opinion. It was a law of nature. Every civilization in recorded history had anchored its money to something physical. Gold, silver, copper, something you could weigh, bite, and trust. On the idea that money could be just a promise, backed by a system, backed by institutions. This was heresy. And yet Britain proved it worked. Not for a few months, for 24 years, through the deadliest wars of the era. This moment, this quiet, panicked decision in February 1797, is the seed of the modern financial world. In 1914, every major power suspended gold convertibility at the start of World War I. Overnight, without warning. They needed to fund industrialized warfare, and gold couldn't move fast enough. They all did what Britain had done first. They just called it an emergency. In 1944, the Bretton Woods system tried to put the genie back in the bottle, tying the world's currencies to the US dollar and the dollar to gold. It was a half measure, a compromise between the old world and the new. And in 1971, Richard Nixon ended gold convertibility of the US dollar. Permanently, no warning, no referendum. One Sunday night television address, and 6,000 years of metal-backed money was over. Every major economy followed within 2 years. The world has operated on pure paper credit, fiat money. Ever since, every dollar, every euro, every pound in your wallet right now is backed by exactly what British banknotes were backed by in 1797. Not gold, not silver, trust in institutions, in tax systems, in the credibility of a state. Britain didn't just survive the suspension of gold, it proved that the suspension of gold was the future. They just proved it 174 years before everyone else caught up. If this changed how you think about the money in your pocket, subscribe, because the next video tells the story of how Britain turned that financial power into something even more dangerous, the first industrial war machine. I'll see you there.